Hello and welcome to the Ranching Returns podcast, where we believe that when done right, your return on ranching can be far more than just extreme profitability, but a return to your land resource as well as a priceless lifestyle. Hey there, and welcome back to the Ranching Returns podcast, sponsored by Faro Cattle Company, your source for forage-developed, low-input cattle and bulls that will provide fantastic females that really thrive in your environment and work on your ranch. Before actually I dive into today's episode, I'm recording this introduction as of July 5th, one day after July 4th, obviously the 250th anniversary of this country's existence. Wow. Happy birthday, America. That's incredible. Feeling awfully grateful for the freedoms and, just the opportunity to live in this country where the sky's the limit as far as potential for people who want to go out and make things happen. The freedoms we have to, to speak our minds and to practice our religion. It's truly a blessing. Great. So grateful for those who sacrificed to give me that opportunity. Thank you. And if you are still serving this country, fighting for those freedoms, I thank you for that as well. It blew my mind. At church last week, there was a couple celebrating their 74th wedding anniversary, and the husband will be 100 years old this fall. And it was like, wow, he's been alive for like 40% of this country's existence. That's crazy to me. Pretty cool. But enough about that. Hope you all had a wonderful 4th of July weekend and appreciate the freedoms that we get in this country. I know I'm grateful to be here. Today's episode is with Tyson Langland, and it's always enjoyable for me to talk to somebody who's come from a more similar region to me. He's from Brookings, South Dakota, so eastern South Dakota, about 3.5, maybe 4 hours west of me, and so about as close as you can get in South Dakota to where I'm at. Similar, rainfall, maybe a little less, but similar kind of climate and stuff. And so he's going to share today his story of coming back home to the family farm and really kind of trying to make the cow herd work. It was really just a side thing. I shouldn't say that. It was more of a side enterprise for their family's farm, and he came home and changed the focus, changed the priorities, changed the cow type, the calving season, the breeding window, and just made a bunch of changes to really increase the profitability of that enterprise. And that's I really enjoy talking to people who have focused on the business side of the cow-calf business, and so we dive into that. I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Thank you to everybody who's followed the page on YouTube. We hit that 1,000 subscriber goal and just keeps rolling. Keep if you haven't, keep following the channel on any social media platform and share the podcast, whether it's short clips or episodes, with somebody you think might enjoy it. With that, we will dive into today's episode with Tyson, and I hope you enjoy it. Tyson, thank you so much for joining me, and welcome to the Ranching Returns podcast.
I appreciate you having me, and I've been a longtime fan and longtime listener of, just all the great content that you've put out the last few years.
I appreciate that. And I enjoyed talking to folks who are not quite, but more similarly in my region. So we can I feel like have a little more conversation that's relevant to actually my operation. So I'm excited to learn from you. For folks who haven't heard of you, I know you've been on at least one other podcast. They've probably heard of you. Tell me about yourself, your operation, where are you from, what do you do? And kind of how you came to what you're doing.
Yeah, so my family, we farm and ranch in Brookings, South Dakota, which is on the far eastern, towards the middle of the state. Extensive row cropping. My dad's been big into row cropping ever since I was a kid. Cattle has always been, to him kind of a secondary thought until I joined the operation. I've been full-time back at the ranch. It'll be 11 years now. And it's been an awesome journey for myself, just with all the things that we've been dabbling in, whether it be cattle genetics, the biologics and helping the land, and the grazing aspect of it, and a lot of the data management that is probably my tried and true and favorite thing, simply because my background in college and then shortly after college, before I came back to the ranch, that's where a lot of my time and energy was spent with data management.
Yeah. So did you say you were largely a crop farm and not as much on the cattle prior to coming home?
Yeah, so most of my life, my dad loves row cropping, and that's who I farm with. And then my wife and our kids have gotten more involved since we moved back full time. But yeah, so the cattle herd has really expanded the most since I've been back. It was one of those things that was really important for my dad, which I'm so appreciative of. I don't know if he had that same similar experience, so maybe that's why he did it. And I have asked him, but I've gotten some vague answers. But he believes big in, if you're going to come back and be a part of the operation, I want you to be able to have your own entity and do
Sure.
what you're passionate about and be able to be someone who even at a young age is making decisions, is failing more often than maybe
Yeah.
someone who doesn't get a chance to make decisions until their 50s and 60s. How, we see a lot on farms and ranches, the dad hangs on till he's 90 years old, and then the
Right.
son takes it over someday and he's 65 and he's never made a decision in his life. So
Right.
I'm very grateful for that aspect of it. So yeah, we've expanded quite a bit in the last decade.
Cool. Well, I want to hear more about, all of the changes and the things that have happened there but I'm curious, kind of going back, growing up on the farm, did you expect to come back? Was that something you wanted to do? Was there opportunities, did you know there was an opportunity growing up, or how did that
Well,
kind of
the
happen?
the opportunity was came later in life. I think back when I was a kid, I was always, a part of the farm. I helped on the farm. That was just kind of the expectation. And then I always, as a kid, had a love affair with sports and the athletic side of
Yeah.
things. So when I
Yeah.
went to after high school, I went to college at UNLV in Las Vegas, studied sports management.
Wow.
Worked for the NCAA while I was in college, and then shortly after that, spent time in the scouting and analytics and with the New York Giants for a couple of years, and then worked for a company called Pro Football Focus. They do a lot of the advanced stats and analytics for the NFL, which would be similar to the Moneyball side of Major League Baseball. So
Yeah.
that was a really great experience. And then the opportunity came about when my dad and I had a conversation about that same timeline I had mentioned before of coming back. He was at an age where the farm was successful enough where he could support another person. He was getting there to an age standpoint of wanting more help. And so when those conversations initially came about, it was more of, like I had mentioned earlier, was just, what does that look like for me? What does that look like for my family? Obviously, agriculture is in my background, but at the
Hmm.
same time, I've been away from it now for, a number of years. So if
Yeah.
that's something that I want to do, it's got to be a long-term solution. And I'm grateful that the row cropping side had been so good to my father that it was able for me to come back and really take over the cow herd and change it in a lot of ways. I would say mostly for the good, but there's always heated conversations around changing
Yeah.
something that someone else has built.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious personally, because I know I had this conversation when I was coming home from college. A lot of parents, they kind of have this belief you should send the kid off for a certain amount of time, whatever, 3 years, 5 years,
Hmm.
something like that. And dad and I were having this discussion, and he needed help back at home and ultimately ended up coming back right away. And so I never worked off the farm. I was partly
Hmm.
concerned, and I told him the concern. I was like, Dad, I don't know. Yes, I want to farm. I love to farm, but I could see how if I got a job with I was looking at seed companies or different things, company truck,
Hmm.
benefits, good hours, good pay.
Yeah.
Like coming back home to farm might be a challenge. You sounds like had kind of like the dream job, exactly what you were wanting to do anyway. How was that? I mean, was it not what you expected? Did you just know you wanted to farm anyway? Was it a challenge to adapt back to farm lifestyle versus the more, I don't know, and maybe it wasn't a straight 9 to 5. I know sports can be pretty demanding too, but yeah, how about
Hmm.
all that?
Oh yeah, that's a great question, and that's a question I pondered a lot myself when I was contemplating making the switch back home. Was the lifestyle will be a lot different. You said it. Sports is a very demanding industry that really asks for a lot and offers very little in return as far
Hmm.
as boundaries of time,
Really?
communication with other people. It's just like you said, very demanding.
Right.
And for me, it was a two-part question that I was asking myself. It's like, what do I want for my life long term? And what
Yeah.
does my family's legacy mean to me? Because
Hmm.
is very important to me. I think about it all the time with my own four kids and my wife. And it's like, what do you want to build? What do you want to be remembered for?
Yeah.
Do you care about being remembered, or do you want to be someone who's an integral part of the community? And those were all things that I thought about. And community is important to me. Where we farm and ranch is Bruce, South Dakota, which is close to Brookings. very
Hmm.
small town, less than
Sure.
500 people, so it's like, how can me and my family make an impact in the community? And those were a lot of the things, and ultimately led me to, I love entrepreneurship, and farming and ranching. No matter what people say, it is entrepreneurship. You are a business owner. You should be treating it like a business. Your financial decisions should be made like a business. And I think all that exposure from working with large companies like I was a good test for me, and it was a good learning, because I don't feel like I would have been as well equipped coming back to the farm and ranch at 20 versus I was,
Yeah.
at 28 or whatever. So
Hmm.
for me, yeah, it was hard to leave because you devote your whole life to it. Most people
Right.
don't have the opportunities to get jobs like that, and I was very fortunate for that. I spent a lot of time with people who, you make very little. You make very little when you're in positions that I was in, whether it be with Pro Football Focus or the New York Giants. You make very little, but you're so passionate about it, it really doesn't matter what you make.
Yeah.
A lot of people think you make a lot of money in sports, and you do if you're the coach or the
Right. Or
GM or
player.
a player.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But the low
Right.
level employees, you're paid like a normal low
Yeah.
level employee. So for me, it was
Right.
all about entrepreneurship and being an asset to my dad, and being an asset to our family, and the legacy. And I had so many ideas from when I was a kid on the farm. I had ideas of what I wanted to do someday. And, right or wrong, my dad's very conventional. Like, he comes from the generation where if you learned how to do something, that was the only way to do it. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of conversations around that. But, my only stipulation was, if I come back to the farm and ranch, and I want to be an asset, and I want to be somebody who moves the needle in our operation.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, oh, that makes sense. So, I mean, was it apparent that you were going to come back pretty quick then? That, yeah.
Yeah, it only took me, I think it took me a solid month to really think about it and
Hmm.
just weigh out all the pros and cons, and just be like, I know what I'm doing. Most people would die to do, but the demanding schedule was
Yeah.
also the thing that kind of hung over my head, because, when you have a wife and you have kids, that lifestyle is not conducive to it. I mean, I remember this past Super Bowl with the Patriots and the Seahawks, listening to the Seahawks coach say that during the season he sees his kid for 30 minutes a week.
Right.
And I mean, that is real stuff. And like, I got that, and I saw that. So
Wow.
that was a, long ago I saw that. So that was like, oh man, I love family, and that was just not something that I could see myself doing long term,
Yeah.
simply from that standpoint as well.
Right. So you came home, and I'm curious too. This will get into sort of like the just relationships and farming with family and stuff. It sounds like your dad was very, I don't know what the right word is, intentional. Like he knew you needed to have something that was yours, some purpose,
Hmm.
management experience, opportunity to learn and fail and whatnot. I guess talk about those kinds of discussions as you came home and stuff too, because I don't know. I guess a lot of people, maybe there's some folks listening who have kids coming home someday that would be important to learn from, or from the son's perspective coming home, what were things that you wish you had done differently, or maybe could have
Mm.
more smoothly transitioned you in that,
Hmm.
or did well that, allowed for a smooth transition from your perspective.
Yeah, I'll hit on both of those. I think the first thing that I'll go to what I could have done differently.
Sure.
I think about this often, and I think people relate with this. When I came home, my agriculture experience from when I was a kid, I always stayed in touch with agriculture.
Hmm.
I followed, shoot, even when I was working for the New York Giants, I was following grazing and stuff like that. I really enjoyed all that stuff. But
Yeah.
when I came home, it's a mindset of almost a purist mindset, I call it. Like, there's only
Mm-hmm.
one way to do something. You become a purist of like, oh, we don't do this, or this, because that goes against the rules of this,
Yes.
and this. And it's like, I think being more open and having better conversations with my dad about,
Hmm.
this is why I want to do this. This is why it's important. And for me, he's seen someone who's been removed and saying, wait a minute, you've been gone, but now you're trying to dictate what should happen right away. And
Hmm.
and there was a level of it that he gave me a lot of slack, but there was some times where I probably should have just stopped and listened a little bit more and tried to explain myself instead of just saying, nope,
Right.
this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
So I would say less purist over the years has been better for me, of just being flexible. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be my way all the time, and we can, and there's middle ground that we can find.
Hmm.
And from the first question you had asked to this one was with what my dad, yeah, he was very intentional, because I was the only one ever interested in the farm and ranch, and I know age played a factor in that. But I think, someone, he's 67 now. At the time when I came back, I was in his late 50s, and he had been farming on his own since he was 18 years old. And that was back in the day when you could, pretty financially viably, buy some used equipment, buy a couple quarters of land, back in the,
Hmm.
I think it, whatever age range that would have been, because he talked about that, how you could be a beginning farmer without a lot of help. And and I give him all the credit, because he built it on his own. It was one of those things where he put his neck out there. He farmed with his dad. His dad didn't own a lot of land, rented a lot of land. So he was the one, in as far as our family goes, that really moved the operation forward as far as land base and,
Sure.
putting risk and things like that. So being a
Yeah.
better listener. And as I've gotten older, I've tried to do that, be a better listener, soak up all of his wisdom, even though it's maybe not exactly how I would, pursue a situation, or,
Hmm.
having different ideas, but still being able to be respectful enough to listen. We don't have to agree with our parents all the time, or we don't have
Right.
to agree with our, whether it be a workmate or different family. But I think it's important that we have a respect level for one another, where you're still willing to listen.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I agree with a lot of it, including, to your earlier point, the purist mindset and stuff too. That was me for sure for quite a while. And it's funny. I think it's
Hmm.
probably a stage everybody has to go through of, yeah, being arrogantly confident and this is the way things have to happen, and then letting life smack you around a little bit and realize what actually, yeah,
For
it's
sure. For
it's not
sure.
all it's not all that easy. That's great. Good. So you did come home and kind of started taking over the livestock side of it too.
Hmm.
Do you kind of work collaboratively with your dad on both enterprises, but you manage the livestock then? Is that kind
Hmm.
of how that's set up?
Jeffrey Steffen for Farmatan USA, and we're on the phone with Nick Small of Fullerton, Nebraska.
Well, I run a 150 cow-calf operation.
And he ran into a scours issue with your herd, and then a friend of yours told you about Farmatan.
Jared Dubas, and he used Farmatan. And he's the first one that told me about it. And I didn't understand exactly what it all product was. And then I watched a segment on the RFD TV. There's a detailed segment about how it gets rid of, it covers all the scours.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a big problem with coccidiosis scours. And I went through my whole herd. And I used this product. I didn't have a single coccidiosis last year at all. So last year, I just put this tannin, Farmatan, granular in the salt and mineral. I mixed it in 60 days prior to calving and 60 days after.
And after starting Farmatan, you noticed something different in the calves.
That's, like I said, the biggest thing is once they're on the ground, they're sucking the cow, they're hitting the ground running.
And I assume if you would be talking to someone who's skeptical about Farmatan, you would say what?
What I would say is go ahead and try it. You have a little bit of dollars to lose, a lot to gain.
To learn more about Farmatan, you can check out farmatanusa.com, or you can call Paul Mitchell, who is actually the person I get my Farmatan from, and you can reach him at 515-745-1639. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great setup. I'm a paid employee of our farm and ranch. From my salary goes between helping my dad with row cropping, whether that's planting, harvesting, all of those things as well. And
Yeah.
then I still get a salary for the livestock as well. And then my added bonus on that is he owns a certain percentage of the cows, and then I own the rest. So a lot of
Sure.
we'll split expenses, share profits, and things like that. And
Yeah.
he has a lot of our land base, as far as the grazing aspect it's probably about half owned and half rented. So we'll cost share on a lot of that stuff. He still enjoys the livestock, but he doesn't want to be involved on the day-to-day stuff of it. We've grown the livestock enterprise a lot since I've come back. He always hovered around the national average of having a number of cows, even though we had enough pasture, just because that was what he could do.
Sure.
So we've we've probably doubled that on the side of, what we're capable of, or what we were capable of. We don't have
Hmm.
a ton of acres from the grazing standpoint, but where we are, much like you are, I can run 25 cows on a rotational grazing system on a half acre a day, a half acre
Hmm.
to 3/4 of an acre, just because our ground is that productive,
Yeah.
because that's just the way it is in eastern South Dakota. So it doesn't take as many acres as it does in western South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming,
Right.
so, but the grass base is different. Adapted genetics is important. So
Hmm.
yeah, we collaboratively work together. And
Yeah.
my oldest son is, even though he's 10, he's become an integral part of our operation as far as learning, him being there. We did, we're moving fence together, when we're grazing. He's there on work days when we're doing cattle, just to get him involved, because it seems to be the love of his life already.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm curious, a personal interest. I've got a 4-year-old son now and a 2-year-old daughter. When is the age where they can start, I don't know, this is going to sound mean, going from like just hanging along or maybe even slowing you down to a net positive and actually helping to
Hmm.
accelerate you getting your work done?
Oh yeah, I'd say that 8 to 9 to 10 year
Okay.
old age range is
Okay.
where they become a net positive, and they're not. I hate to
Yeah.
use this word, but it's kind of like they're not so needy. They can hang
Yeah.
out for the whole day, and
Right. Right.
if you have snacks and drinks packed for them, they're usually pretty good.
Right. Okay. Good to know. So we're getting
Hmm.
closer. All right.
Getting closer. Yep, you're
Cool.
halfway there.
Yeah, good. Well, they definitely have the interest so far, which is awesome. Right now, they're fighting over who
Hmm.
gets to come riding with me. Or best case scenario is Grandpa and I are both working on something, so they each have a lap and a 4-wheeler to sit on. So that's
Oh
great.
yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
Good. Okay, so you came back, and I'm curious, just like as you came back, what was the operation at that time as far as the cattle enterprise and the cow type and management type,
Hmm.
and what were your initial thoughts? This is the things that need to happen, and how did that evolve over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing that I noticed right away was the cow type was your pretty typical. I like to call it. I even teased my dad about this today. It was called like a farmer cow, weighed
Okay.
18 to 1900
Wow.
pounds. Feed was never an issue. It was
Right.
always right there in front of them. Grazing was optional for them, if
Sure.
because they were getting enough
Really.
otherwise.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so that was the first thing, that just because, even while, like I said, even while I was away from the farm, I was reading stuff from, whether it be Kid Pharaoh, Teddy Gentry, that's
Hmm.
involved with the South Poles,
Right.
even guys that go way back, Larry Lenhart, that from Shoshone Angus, who passed on, but just a lot of people talking about cow type and grazing and all of that. So there was an idea that I had, and there's a couple gentlemen in my area who raise a lot of Angus cattle that would be more to what we were looking for. Your moderate frame cow, whatever that means to some people is different, but for us, it was moving that needle from a non-frame score 6 or 7, 18 to 1900 pound cow, down to smaller frame score, like 4 or 5 to 1200 pound, was kind of our ideal.
Hmm.
That's where we'd like to be, a little bit more on the efficiency side. And yeah, and Angus breeders would probably know him. One of the guys' name that I spent a lot of time talking to and just getting would be John Cotton in Volga, South Dakota. And then I had bought some bulls from another gentleman where they used to be together, John Cotton and Ricky Highland. And that's kind of how we got our start. It was, we kept the cows that we had, and then used bulls from the more moderate framed Angus. A lot of those genetics were Oldie and Shoshone Angus, which was pretty, was a lot of the White Plantation, and on the East Coast was one that I really looked up to. I thought they have a lot of good foundation cows. So that was kind of where we started. It's evolved immensely from that. But so we didn't really cull hard. But I think we only have, from when I came back originally, she's 14 years old. We have one farmer cow left, and she's been making it every year. But other than that, it's been a yearly success story of keeping our own replacement heifers. Where,
Yeah.
for a while there, it was pretty much all of them. And now we've gotten it down to the point where we're putting the bull in for 1 month, from May 1st. We want May 1st to May 30th, or the end of May, on our heifers. So we're putting them in for 30 days and then seeing what we get there, essentially trying to do the Burke Tykert of the
Right.
best heifers. So yeah,
Sure.
it's evolved a lot. But with all that being said, it's been a complete turnover minus the one cow that made it.
Right. So I'm curious. I grew up with this type of a cow my whole life. I've never gone from a 1,900-pound cow to a 1,200-pound cow. And so, what did you see just in terms of management, grazing, stocking rate, things when you went from, that's a fairly drastic drop, 30% roughly or so in size of cow over the course of a short period of time? What things did you notice?
The biggest thing I noticed right away was just how poor doing a lot of the larger animals are. That doesn't mean they're all poor doing, because some of them could have a high average daily gain and a low feed intake. I mean, that's genetically possible. But whatever genetics that I started with, I just noticed that my dad was pasturing them very little time out of the year, so they were mostly on stored feed, whether that be silage or alfalfa or whatever. But when you, as you probably know, when you take crutches away fairly quickly, it doesn't take much to really start getting some big fallout. And an animal like that is obviously going to raise a lot bigger of a calf, because that size of animal is going to milk a lot heavier. And that was the hardest shift probably for my father to see, was like, oh, at weaning our calves, man, they're a lot smaller. I mean, not a lot smaller, but a 19 to 1,800-pound cow could easily, when I first got there, and people see this probably often, is they can wean a 700-pound calf pretty easily,
Sure.
but that's not even half their body weight. Where we're now with May, June calving, we calve May 1st to June 20th. And, we're lucky if we wean a 600-pound calf. That would be really good. We're in that 500-pound range pretty consistently, and we're weaning in January. That's what we like to wean when it's really cold. We feel, and we fence line wean, and we feel like, you get a lot less of they're not as much worried about mom as they are just staying warm. And the fence line obviously helps a lot of things. But that was the biggest drastic thing, was animal composition and phenotype changes a lot. And I was trying to buy cows. We did buy some cows when we started too, for some people who ran them a lot harder than we did, or had fewer crutches than we did. And that made a big difference, because there's some sort of herd instinct within all animals of, one's the boss and one's the follower. And, teaching cattle, like, okay, we kind of got to do it on our own, not totally leaving them, but we do expect you to graze when there is grazable forage there. And that was the thing that we stopped doing right away, was making silage and making high dairy quality alfalfa or anything like that. We just basically went to a program where it was like, you will graze crop residue as long as we can. We'll graze stockpiled grass as long as we can. And even when we're on stockpiled grass or crop residue, we will supplement you. It'll be very moderate to little, but we will help you. But we're not going to let you just have free reign of all of our feed resources, because I remember my dad telling me for a long time how unprofitable the cow enterprise was. And obviously, as most of your listeners know, the biggest expense with any livestock operation is how much stored feed do you have to feed, and how much is it costing you?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've wondered a lot of times too, if that average cow herd size of 30, 40 cows or whatever and stuff that a lot of people have is not because that's what they can manage to do, or that's what they have grass for. It's because that's what they can afford to subsidize or something, that's what, any bigger than that. And all of a sudden it starts to be a fairly significant part of a budget and a profit and loss statement that you can't let that go on too long or something. But no, that's interesting. And I, that you mentioned that 1,900-pound cow weaning 700-pound calf. I wonder what she would have weaned had you been trying to run her the same way you're running your cows now, in terms of breed up, and would she, when they're getting, kind of all the feed they can want, corn silage and haylage and whatnot and stuff too. That's going to help, I'm sure.
For sure.
Yeah. No, so that's, oh, that I bet that's a very different. I know a lot of times people, when they come and look at our cows, or they look at our bulls at the sale barn, or at the the Faro sales and stuff, man, you can see it in their face. And I'll tell them, you're not going to offend me. Tell what you think. Tell me what you think. They're smaller.
They're small, for sure.
It's going to be a bit of a change in a comfort. You got to get comfortable with that, I suppose, for a lot of people who are especially used to cows as large as that.
Yeah, that was a big one for my dad. It was like, oh wow, okay, we typically don't use yearling bulls anymore. We do keep a lot of our own bulls, but we don't use them till they're 2 years old. And simply for the fact that they probably wouldn't breed very much as a 1-year-old. I mean, they would try and they would maybe get the job done, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that was the one thing that took a lot of getting used to for our family. Was this is a totally different mindset. It's not necessarily
Right.
good or bad.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
just we have different objectives and different goals,
Right.
simply because we want it to be a profitable enterprise. And it did take a while to become a profitable enterprise, simply because of the fallout that we had from the original cows that we started with. But once we
Hmm.
started getting our own heifers in production and putting the selection pressure on, then it got to a point where now we don't we do I should say we don't. We do occasionally buy in some outside cows from people that we trust or run harder than we do. But all of our females now are kept and selected at our place through a number of different selection criteria, and it has really made our cow herd that much better. Like, for example, we started calving May 1st this year, and we're at June 12th now. By the end of May, we were 95% done already. So, I mean, it's
Wow.
made a big difference in breed up. Breed up, I often remember, even when I was a kid, and one of the first few years that I hadn't quite taken over the livestock yet, but it was, I remember a lot of the breed up was pretty questionable at best, and the breeding season was long. That
Hmm.
was another giant shift from my dad's thought. He always had a 90-day breeding season, and we've cut
Yeah.
it down to 45 to 50
Wow.
days, just depending on the year. So
Right.
that was another big shift.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a huge shift too, I imagine, in that weaning weight and stuff too, to consolidate, get more uniform calves and tighten up that window.
Hmm.
Yeah. Now, was he calving? I guess when was he calving from, starting from and finishing prior to you coming back? And yeah,
Yeah,
you
so he
switched to.
started about the 1st of March, and then
Okay.
would end probably about the end of May, with a
Sure.
few stragglers on the back end. That
Yeah.
was the biggest change too. I remember, helping as a kid, and
Yeah.
just South Dakota, eastern South Dakota, March is, in my opinion, is the worst for calving because of the mud. Like, I would
Yes.
rather,
Right.
like, we had talked about this. There's no perfect calving season, but
Hmm.
if I'm calving in eastern South Dakota, I'm either calving before the mud or after the mud,
Right.
because the mud is ultimately worse than the cold and the snow.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. No, it seems like this spring anyway. Yeah, we can calves and cows, they can handle it being cold and dry, or they can handle it
Hmm.
being wet and warm. But cold and wet is calf killing weather, and that's what
Oh,
March
for
is.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have
Yeah.
a lot of memories of that as a kid, just of calves stuck in the mud or getting, or being
Right.
dead in the mud. And that was my biggest shift. It's like, well, we don't have the facilities to calve when it's cold, and
Hmm.
I want to do it when it's warm to make my life easier. So we've
Yeah.
played around with different dates over the years: May 1st, May 15th, the 20th of
Yeah.
April, and we just kind of stick with May 1st. But, like, even May 1st this year, our earliest calf came April 24th. So you're always going to get a few of those
Yeah.
early ones.
Right. Right. So, and I don't know how much we'll talk about your data and stuff on the cows. And I should plug for anyone who's listening. If you haven't already, go back and listen to the episode you did with Clay Connery. It was a fantastic
Mm.
episode. I've listened to it a
Hmm.
couple times now, I think, and you really get into your kind of your data and stuff. I'm curious, on the data side, did you keep financial records from the start? And what did you start to see as you made these changes, grazing longer, using crop residue, pulling out the feed, different things?
Hmm.
Bringing the cow size down as the weaning weight was coming down? I mean, what did you start to see?
Hmm.
And maybe you didn't, totally fine if you didn't either, but did you have good kind of economic data on this, and what did you see?
Yeah, this is something I tracked from the very beginning, because
Awesome.
my thought of it was always, if I'm going to be doing something, I want to be doing it profitably, because there's no sense in doing something where you're
Right.
losing money
Yeah.
or, breaking even. And I know that is hard with farming and ranching, especially on the row cropping side. That is becoming more challenging as of late.
Hmm. Yeah.
But I started to think early. It's like, well, what can I do? And a guy who was really influential. I never took ranching for profit, but I watched a lot of Dave Pratt's YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite ones that he ever put out was one where he talked about, if you get 90% of your cow herd bred, what does it take to get 5% more bred?
Hmm.
And that was always the thing I thought about. What number is
Right.
acceptable to me? What does the economics of that look like?
Yeah.
And am I going to be bummed out if it's personally, which we can get into the emotional side of it. But am I going to be bummed out if it's less than this number, but I'm still being profitable at the same time? Because we all have favorite cows. We all like to get all of our cows bred. I mean,
Right.
that's the rancher's ideal year.
Hmm.
But really removing yourself from, well, if I could just get those tail enders, if I can just really help those tail enders. But then
Yeah.
seeing some of that stuff from Dave and reading some of the stuff from Bert Teicher when he was still at Beef Magazine, it was like, well, the tail enders shouldn't be your focus. The ones you should be continue to focus on are the ones who are getting bred in the first 21 days,
Right.
and they're the ones that are, you don't ever have to look at them, you don't ever have to help, and
Yeah.
it was kind of a natural evolution. And
Hmm.
a lot of people say it can't be done in eastern South Dakota. You have to start feeding hay in October or in November, just because
Yeah.
that's just the way it is. But it's been interesting. The purist started me where, like, oh, we're just going to graze crop residue, no supplement, but that has evolved as well. I think I learned it really hard one year where our cows came out of really poor body condition when they were on crop residue, and they were still milking, heavy, and it gets cold. And the crop residue, I learned, is really good for a dry cow. But
Yeah.
it was when they were losing condition, no matter how good your genetics are, they still have to have the available feed levels, protein and energy levels to sustain their current body condition. So that has evolved on from a profitability standpoint. So I always factor in when we're raising crop residue now. I'm always factoring in some sort of supplement, like soy hull pellets. We use a zero starch supplement. We've used soybean meal in the past, which is very low starch. Yeah, so the economics has evolved, but the thing that I've learned the most over my time is that cattle ranching can actually be very profitable if you know your numbers. The problem is most people don't know their
Hmm.
numbers and don't know what the carrying cost is daily.
Right.
So I have a spreadsheet where I can pretty much nail down daily what it costs to carry that cow versus if she's on pasture, crop residue, or if we've run out of crop residue and now we're feeding hay. And that's been a big
Sure.
game changer of knowing your daily cost. And you can know all the markets in the world, and you can know what all your feed costs, but to know like your daily costs of not only feed, mineral, diesel, and
Hmm.
people trying to factor in yardage and things of that nature. So that
Yeah.
would be my biggest like aha moment, was right away figuring out. And then that has evolved too, of like what it cost me isn't the same as it's going to cost somebody who's in Nevada or Wyoming. It's like everybody has their own personal cost, because like
Mm-hmm.
a loader tractor for us in the wintertime, we finally got it paid off this year, but the cost was a lot more when we still had the payment with it, versus now we're factoring in cost of maintenance and ongoing maintenance moving forward, and we no longer have it. It's fully owned now. So a lot of
Sure.
those costs can change just even on the year. And you probably have talked with numerous guests at length about this, but that's the number one thing. And I know it's hard, because my dad before I came back, he would always consolidate the cow herd into the row cropping. Like it was just all one big pool. But separating that
Sure.
pool and knowing
Yeah.
your daily costs is going to know how profitable you are. Because I tell my wife this often. It's like, what I don't understand is, why would you want to do something and not be profitable? There's nothing that you can love so much where it's actually putting you net backwards.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Well, at least knowing that you are choosing to do that and that you must, yeah, decide that you do happen to love it and willing to spend money on it. I don't remember what I was listening
Hmm.
to recently where someone was talking about, yeah, that they see some people with enterprises losing $100,000 a year, and it's like, if you can afford to spend $100,000 a year on a hobby like that is essentially the equivalent of fishing, I think is the example like that they used or something like that. I mean, it's something
Yeah.
you love, have at it, but at least know that's what you're doing and stuff. So
Right, exactly. I think that was the latest barn talk with the gentleman
yes,
from
John
Ranch
Haskell.
Right.
Yep. Yes,
John
exactly.
Haskell,
Yep.
yes.
You're
That
right.
was a very good episode.
It was
And
great.
he actually got me thinking a lot too, because if anybody of your listeners hasn't listened to it, go back and listen.
Yeah,
He talks a
for
lot
sure.
about the economics of farming and ranching. And he's like, Anytime I listen to him, he's always top tier as far as just making you don't have to agree with him because I don't agree with everything he says, but he makes you really think about the economic side of it. And he's got me really think about making hay. That was a big one because we still make hay. And that's something that I
Mm-hmm.
have put the pencil to before. We just haven't pulled the
Yeah.
trigger on a lot of the decisions around it.
Yeah. Well, and if it's what you're thinking of when he referenced, it was the first time I've really well heard it or heard it described very well, but I've thought about that a lot and stuff too, is yes, let's say you can make hay for the same cost as you can buy it and or even slightly better. That doesn't necessarily take into consideration the opportunity value of all of that land that you have in hay that could be running more cattle or something. And so even if you can make it for the same cost, but now because you buy it in, you can afford to run X amount of head more cattle or something, that allows you to essentially expand your operation, expand your ranch business with somebody else's land, with somebody else's hay resource or something.
Well,
that
absolutely.
that was a really intriguing thought to me too. And I know that's kind of the direction we've been heading and stuff lately too, as well, is just like when we, especially in your fairly similar environment, land costs are expensive. And when you really account for the cost to make hay, I think when we first put pencil to paper on that, this has been several years now ago, we were making a lot of hay in our organic cropping rotation, and I think we were somewhere around $160 a ton to produce this hay. And this was high quality hay, good dairy quality organic hay. And we were feeding that to beef cows in the winter, which $160 a ton is awfully expensive hay to feed to a beef cow anyway.
Oh, for sure.
Let alone, especially when you take its true value of what you could sell it to an organic dairy for, and like, I don't know, $200 something a ton. It was it was a very poor business decision. So yeah, we've definitely moved away from the making hay when it just realized it just didn't make sense in our enterprise, in our region, with the exception of certain, like using cover crops before a soybean crop, or taking off some first crop hay around on pastures to kind of manage a spring flush. We do still make some, but it's not very rare that we have fields set aside for hay production, which, sorry, getting off on a rant here.
No, I think it's a good conversation to have because it really made me think. Because I listened to that episode and really thought through the dynamics of it and really looked at the economics of it, I called a couple in our area, a couple well drilling guys, and just saying, hey, we're close to the Big Sioux River where we're at. We can hit water pretty easily. What does a sand point look like in some of our hay fields, and what's the cost of that?
Yeah.
Because right now we had a major rain event north of us. Big Sioux River runs through a lot of our property, and it flooded some of our pasture, the low ground, that lies in the natural floodplain. And we had to move some cows off there that had been calving with calves. So we moved them to one of our hay fields, don't have water. So that made me think it gives us even more flexibility. And Dad and I decided, well, we're just not going to hay it this year. We'll just graze it because of, because of what happened north of us. So it's like, well, even if we graze it once, we could hay it later too. So just having the flexibility of having water is a huge game changer. Right. And even in that way, it's like we don't have to turn it to pasture right away, but we could use it as pasture now if we get the water figured out. And, we have a neighbor that puts up a lot of hay. He does a good job, sells a lot of it in Rock Valley, Iowa, which is a strong hay market around us. So it's like, why don't we support his business and try and talk with him and say, hey, we want to be a long-term customer. You don't have to truck to Rock Valley. We'll give you a good price. And then you're helping the community out, which is something I think about a lot.
Right. Plus you're importing all that fertility instead of just shuffling it around your own land. And I think we were looking at a farm. We didn't end up getting it, but I had also called for a quote on drilling a well, and I think it was going to be about $16,000 or something. And I was like, yeah, you can drill a lot of wells for the cost of a fleet of haying equipment and stuff too.
For sure.
With just a mower.
Especially what a baler costs these days.
Right, a baler and all these things. I mean, you can drill a lot of wells for that and stuff. So and that cost might have gone up. That's been 5-6 years now too. But yeah, worth the consideration for sure. So what else? I guess you said you've kind of shifted your calving season. You've tightened up your calving window. You've changed your cow size, your grazing crop residue, which it sounds like your dad wasn't necessarily doing. You've got this large row crop enterprise. How do you integrate livestock with your both pasture and row crop land?
Yeah. So that was the one thing I was really thankful for when the time came. We try in our operation, wherever we're going to graze crop residue, where typically is where we have water. A lot of it is, our own ground, but then we do have some rented ground where we graze crop residue on that has water or an access to it. We will haul water occasionally as well.
Hmm.
But the thought behind it is, so right or wrong, we just decide, well, wherever we're going to graze crop residue, we're going to plant non-GMO crops there or whatever, just because it seems to be the utilization for us has been better on conventional crop acres. So that's some of the thought that goes into it. We have a pretty good relationship with some of our neighbors who they're no-till farmers, much like you've talked about with your corn stalk
Right.
bale grazing experiment. We have some no-till farmers around us who want us to utilize the residue on there, helps them in the planting for the following spring. So that was some conversations I had with the gentleman around us that owns some quarters of land that he loves cattle as well. So that's a win-win. He doesn't
Right.
have any cattle currently because he's in his 70s and he got out of it, but he loves seeing cattle on the land. So that was just a phone call I made one day of saying, hey, I see you're a no-till farmer. You've talked to me in the past about you wish you could do more with the residue there of just with helping and planting in the spring. Is this something that we could do? And a lot of that time I spent, and he's good. We have a good agreement with the fencing and stuff. I take care of all the fencing and the water, and he likes a little bit of return per acre for the residue that there, but it's so economically feasible. So we've
Right.
actually been trying to stock enough cattle where we don't have a lot of stockpiled grass left at the end of the summer, and we shifted a lot of to over crop residue grazing just because the economics of it are so much better than pasture in our area. Anything
Hmm.
in our area that is quality ground is usually turned to farm ground, which is probably similar in your area. So we've found that
Yeah.
in the low, next to the river or some of the other pastures that we have that doesn't stockpile well, some of the species of grass, we haven't had a lot of good luck stockpiling it. So the crop residue actually probably had more value to us. So that's where in the beginning I was stockpiling more and trying to graze that through the winter, but the quality of the grass wasn't holding up because it's pretty predominantly cool season dominant. So
Mm.
then we just like, how can we expand our rented crop residue acres to utilize that as winter feed? So, and that was a good conversation that we had early on of like just trying to brainstorm through that, because on some of the open winters, we're able to graze crop residue until February, which is pretty rare for our area. Most people start
Yeah.
feeding hay quite early.
Right.
And then there's years like this year where we were on crop residue December 20th, I think it was this year. We got like 2 feet of snow. We had to pull them off, but then
Yep.
we were able to bring them back out in the middle of January because of our winter was so odd in the fact that it was so warm and it melted a lot of snow even in January. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just trying to be flexible and having enough acres that really can make a dent. And I think the next logical evolution in that is, even though we're May June calving, is it more economical to keep those calves on the cows longer when we go to crop residue? Or is it more economical to wean early and then graze our calves elsewhere and wean them and then have our cows be able to not need as much supplementation?
So that's a good question that I've asked a lot. What are you doing right now, and what are you
So
Yeah.
yeah, so right now we're grazing crop residue with the calves,
Really?
which it's
Okay.
great because it teaches
Yeah.
the young heifers, about grazing and things like that. But the thing I've noticed that the cost of it just continues to rise with the cost of supplement and things like that. So how can I better? So
Yeah.
that's the thing I'm going through. How can I
Right.
better do that? Wean early, which is
Yeah.
pretty much the best idea that I've come up with, rather than trying to also feed hay along with the crop residue or feed more supplements. So
Yeah.
I think this year we'll probably try wean early and see how that goes. I don't love the idea because I do like leaving my heifers on until they're 8 or 9 months old, and maybe that's an option as well. Leave the
Hmm.
heifers, get rid of the bull calves. But then it all becomes, how many times do you want to sort them? How many times do you want to
Right.
handle them? How many
Yeah.
times do you want to do all of that stuff? So I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out the labor aspect of it too, of, well, what
Yeah.
makes most sense?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important question. So that's when you're doing the soy hull supplements or whatever is when you're
Mm-hmm.
doing that. Yeah, which totally makes sense. And I know I've wondered that a lot too. People talk about all the advantages that come from late weaning and keeping those heifers learning and developing their rumens on the cow. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure there's a lot of advantage to it. I have no doubt. in our situation, we're hauling our cows a ways to go to corn stalks, and they're somebody else's farm with a single wire, so we wean early, and it's got its advantages and it's got its disadvantages, but we don't have to supplement it all with the cows. But then I've talked to some people, a couple cooperative producers with PCC down in Nebraska, Gavin Kemp and Paul Landrigan. It really surprised me when I heard that they have to pull the bulls off to go to the farrow development program, but they keep their heifers on them, grazing corn stalks with no supplement all winter. And I'm like, wow. That's incredible.
I would like to see that animal at the end of the winter.
I know. Well,
just out of curiosity.
They said they've got the bulls pulled off and the heifers on them, and there's really no difference, And so I think at first, the first couple of years, there might have been, and I may be speaking out of turn, so I shouldn't, because it's been several months since I talked to him about this. But yeah, it was really impressive to me, and I've always wondered if that's the next challenge. The problem, at least we see here, you probably see it there too, is when that snow comes, they lose condition quick, and if there's calves on them too, I don't know, I'd just be nervous about doing some damage to the fetus, the calves inside them or something, and I wouldn't want to end up in a wreck and stuff. So we haven't done it yet, but there's people doing it, and they're further south where they also don't have it quite as often. I don't think they have the moisture degradation of the corn stalks that we have with snow and stuff up here. That is, you get snowfall on it, then melt, and those corn stalks lose quality a lot faster. But yeah, at least in that environment, it works. And I'm like, that is awesome. I mean, how cool
I know. That's
that
like the perfect ideal scenario that I've ran through my head. Because with our supplementation, we're looking at, I'm figuring it at 35 cents per pair per day, which doesn't sound like a lot. But if you have, if you spread that out, if you're grazing crop residue into February and March, I mean, you're saving on hay. So that's a net positive. But how greedy do you want to get? Could I be saving more if I don't have to supplement that, either? And we raise all of our calves. We'll background them. We have a direct market beef business. So there's a certain number that go into the direct market beef business. We'll typically keep all of the heifers that were born in the first calving cycle as replacements. So we are keeping and feeding quite a few animals. The remainder of those animals we do send to the sale barn. But I mean, at least half of them are staying. So we still have to feed them as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awesome. I'll be excited to see what you end up deciding to do. And you probably have a better ability to keep records than I do. So when you actually, if you do an early weaning, what you actually see on the economics of that, because I've heard people talk about how you can, early weaning, you can raise both separately far cheaper than raising them together, because, to supplement a cow in order to supplement the calf is a very inefficient way to supplement that calf.
It is. And I've seen that even after we wean in January, it's like I say to myself every year, I just haven't done it. It's like, why wasn't I doing this months ago? Because it is so much cheaper. The amount of dry matter they eat is obviously less. The amount of supplementation they need goes way down, if any at all. And the calf becomes a more efficient converter because they're not using the milk. They're only using the feed rather than using two sources of feed. And I know they're not milking a lot probably in January, but they're still using some body condition off that cow.
Right. Yeah. Oh, good. So you do the little bit of supplement there in the corn stalks, which totally makes sense. The summer you pulled away all the feed that your dad was doing. I guess salt and mineral, I assume, is your other program. And what are you guys doing for that?
Yeah. Salt and mineral has been pretty much standard from the beginning. We've always been longtime users. We love the Redmond 10 fine salt on the salt side. And then in our area, we're short on iodine. So we do on the salt, we do with the added cobalt and the added iodine. And then on mineral, for quite a few years, we used Howard Blueprint Cow-Calf 5, which is a chelated, but then we started to do more forage testing, I have anyways. And so actually having one made now that's custom in Sioux Falls. There's a plant in Sioux Falls that will make a custom mineral mix for you. So that was put together with a friend of mine he owns a feed store, and he kind of helped me with that. And so we've jumped on that. And this is the first year trying that, so I don't have a lot of results, good or bad. It's just been new. But for whatever reason, we have a hard time getting our cows to consume dry mineral when on grass. And I have a number of different thoughts on that. They consume almost none. The calves probably eat more than the cows do, simply out of curiosity or just wanting to try it. So we moved to, in the summertime, there's a cool company by us in Hartford, South Dakota called True North Feeds. They make They make mineral tubs. They're different than a lot of companies. They don't have a molasses base. They use a DDG base, so that is quite different than most people do. But they're heavy users. They put Redmond 10 fine salt in it. You can do the garlic, which we do pretty much year round, and then they put Redmond conditioner in it. And then there's this tub that I use that they have humates in it as well. Humates are really good for digestion and conversion in cattle. There's a ton of long-term studies on the benefits of feeding humates to cattle. So they have humates in there, and then there's a really cool probiotic in there that I talked with the owner of the company that I got him to add specifically for the tubs that we have made, that it's 19 different bacteria families, and then it's 1,800 different strains. So really beneficial bacteria to feed that rumen every time they use it. So yeah, that's kind of our mineral program. And I don't love the cost of a mineral tub, but it's always kind of because it's about 10 to 12 cents per pair more per day than just straight mineral. But I want them consuming mineral, especially when they're calving, and then in July when they're trying to get bred. We'll see mineral consumption tick back up on the dry side in the fall, but all summer long, I would hate, as a security standpoint, I would hate for them to not be consuming any mineral. So we've changed the mineral tub, and that's been great. The recommendation, I think, on the tub is about a pound per head per day. That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing maybe half a pound a head per day. And so on a half a pound of consumption on that specific tub that we're using, it's 2 ounces of Redmond 10 fine salt, and then it'd be 2 ounces of conditioner, and then it has a semi chelated, it's like a partial chelate, and then with the humates and the probiotic.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm just curious why you want them to take the mineral if it's there available free choice and they're not consuming it. Is that have you seen issues in the past with that, or? I've wondered. So I think it's Steve Campbell or somebody talks about kind of like the push the salt and you don't need mineral kind of a concept and stuff. And we've tried that for a few years, and now we've kind of offered it back free choice, just a Craftsman mineral. But otherwise, I don't know. It's kind of hard. I don't know if we're seeing issues or not. It's not been terrible wrecks or anything, but just kind of the straight salt and conditioner method has worked. And is there a reason why you want them taking that mineral or getting that mineral?
Well, and maybe it's just like a false security I have in my head, but in our region, we're high in iron in our soils and high in iron in our water, which iron, it can be an antagonist for copper and a few other trace minerals. So it ties up copper when you're higher in iron, and copper is obviously one of the most essential minerals when it comes to breeding, overall thrift, hair coat and things like that, and just animal health. So that was probably the main reason when I first started. That's why I wanted the higher levels with the custom made mineral. So we're going to try that. I haven't seen a lot of issues prior to that. I mean, we don't have a lot of trouble with stillborn calves or unthrifty calves, but it's just kind of like that added security on it. And the conditioner, and I'd be curious what you do, because the conditioner, when we do put that out free choice, it is in the mineral tub as well. But then the free choice one, we'll do it 1 part conditioner and then either 2 or 3 parts. We use sugar as an enticer.
Yeah. We're using molasses as an enticer and doing 1 part conditioner, 3 parts salt as well. And the consumption, I don't know. Yeah, it maybe did slow down when we first started adding conditioner, but it's not been drastic, if at all. Did you freeze? Sorry, my internet cut out there for a bit.
Oh, no problem.
Running on Starlink. Their SpaceX IPO today must have messed up somehow my
for sure.
my internet. No, that we're doing about the same as far as that, and as I don't know if you had a specific question, but like as far as in consumption and stuff, I haven't seen a major issue. But maybe at the beginning, I think they were like, what's this and stuff, and we added in a little slower. But now we've got it up to that, and they seem to be taking it just fine.
That was always my thing, because that's what I wanted to ask you with the conditioner is the consumption, typically pretty steady, a couple ounces or an ounce or whatever. Not that it has to be anything specific, but I noticed it's wildly varied on times. Where they'll consume a lot of it. There will be times where they consume none of it. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with nutrition and pastures and soil quality and all of that. But that was my biggest question, because conditioner is always a tricky one. It's not very palatable. We're trying to make it palatable, and we want them to use it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I this is the whole salt and mineral conversation is one that I have figures out of my depth a little bit. I don't have the answers because we've been for a few years doing just kind of the straight salt program, salt and conditioner with no mineral. And we had randomly like a calf die, and Dad had the vet come out and post it to send a sample to see if it was deficient in anything, and it wasn't, with no mineral.
Sure.
That being said, last year we had some pink eye concerns and different things, and I don't know, we just wondered, are we having a mineral deficiencies issues or something? So this year we added it back kind of free choice with the cows, and they're not consuming a lot of it, if at all, just a Craftsman free choice mineral and stuff. And so maybe the salt conditioner mix is adequate in and of itself. I don't measure the consumption as much as it sounds like you do and stuff too. I probably should, but we got groups spread all over the place. It's kind of just like,
oh yeah,
they need more, I'll bring more, kind of a thing.
Right.
But yeah, it's something that everyone always talks about, having it right and figuring it out, and it's concerning, like the stress of if we're messing something up with this. But I don't know. Yeah,
I think it's easy to go there though. Like if you have a calf die, or you have maybe a couple die within a few days of each other or something, I think it's easy to say, what am I doing wrong? What am I missing? And sometimes it's nothing. I had a calf that, I don't have every calf posted, but I had one a couple years ago where we had a few die within maybe a month of each other, and we got them posted. And one had a Clostridium problem, and that can be normal. That can happen, if you don't catch it early enough, easy for them to go downhill fast. And the other one was born with a hole in its heart. I mean, no mineral deficiency. I can't believe it even lived as long as it did. It was about a month old and had a hole in its heart. So I think its heart just gave out eventually. So I think it's easy to say, well, we need to add this back because that'll fix this problem, where I don't know if that's always the case, because we found over the years too, as our soil health improves through grazing practices, we spend quite a bit of time researching, and we've used a lot of different biologics on our pasture ground, like whether that be different microbes, sugar mixes, molasses, whatever it is. There's totally different things you can do. But we found that as that increases, it seems like a lot of the inputs decrease. I mean, as far as mineral goes. So that could definitely be one. They always seem to still consume salt at a pretty normal clip. I think chloride's one of those that they always kind of are going after or need. But I think the mineral debate is such a big one. If you're doing any type of rotational grazing, I believe too, where they're getting fresh grass every so often, doesn't have to be every day. Well, I mean, we've done from every day to every 2 weeks or whatever. It seems like mineral consumption goes down the better the grass is. Or a lot of the people that I talk to that are neighbors of ours, they have high mineral consumption in a set stocking scenario where they're turned out to pasture in May and they're collected in September or August or whatever it ends up being. And a lot of those people are seeing high mineral consumption, but I can only imagine because that's the lack of feed or lack of feed quality.
Yeah, no, I need to get Eric Bailey on. I've had him on a couple times for a couple conversations, one around how he does double stocking stockers for half the time and then pulls a bunch off, and then another one on heifer development. And I think the last time I had him on for heifer development, he said the next conversation, a hot topic that he's got to talk about, is his perspective on salt and mineral and stuff. So I'll have to...
that would be a good one.
Yeah, I'll have to have him on to discuss that here soon. But yeah, is there a reason why you've gone with Redmond products on that too then?
It was luckily when we started, there was a company close to us, a feed store, that I had just heard good things about Redmond. I had never tried it. My dad wasn't using it, and they were open to well, we can get it for you and you can try it if you want. So honestly, availability. But then over the years, it's been one of those things where it's kind of just become a staple, because, when things are going well and you don't have a lot of problems and you're not treating a lot of calves and you don't have a lot of wrecks, it's like, you better just kind of stay with what you're doing. Yeah. But they're a really cool company. Right. There's a lady that ran the feed store that got me the original Redmond that I was trying to get because I wanted to use the 10 fine, and she now works for Redmond. So it's fun to hear her talk about her natural transition from, she didn't even know what Redmond was. She didn't believe in any of the more natural approaches, and now she works for Redmond. So it's always fun to chat with her and see what they're doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Funny. No, good. Well, is there anything else on the salt and mineral kind of conversation worth talking about before we move on? Your perspectives on that?
No, I just wanted to share about the Like I
Yeah.
think a lot of people talk about how, it's hard to get consumption at certain times of the year. And that was
Right.
where I was always the purist in the beginning. Oh, I'll never use a protein tub or a mineral tub. But it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you want consumption, sometimes you got to do something different.
Right. Right. No, that makes sense. Good, man. Well, anything else kind of I'm just curious, on the economics of a commercial cow calf. Well, I shouldn't say that entirely. You also do direct market consumption or direct to consumer marketing.
Hmm.
And I'll talk about that in a minute. But on the production side, the cow calf side, is there anything else that you can think of that you've changed since coming home? Did you say 11 years ago? Was that
Yeah.
what it was?
It'll
Yeah.
be 11 years this year.
Okay. That you have drastically impacted your profitability on the cow calf alone, the cow calf side, commercial cow calf. That
I don't think
over
there's
time.
anything else I really did other than obviously the prices have been favorable lately.
That
And
helps.
that's
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
that's always a helping point, even though we don't sell all of
Right.
them into the commodity market, but that obviously helps. But knowing going back to knowing your cost. Too
Hmm.
many people don't know their cost, and that doesn't make them a bad producer. That doesn't make them wrong. But I
Yeah.
would just challenge them to start to even keep track of what it costs daily, because it's wildly different when you look at pasture when you live in our
Right.
area of the world. And it's like, well, is that profitable by pasture, or is it more profitable to run as many cows on the pasture that you have and then try and transition to crop residue earlier? I mean,
Yeah.
just different options. And I know not everybody has the crop residue factor, but I know some people, there's like a producer that I know in Wyoming, or not Wyoming, and he's in Montana, but they're very limited to the amount of good pasture that they have. So for them, it's profitable, very profitable for them to buy in. It'd be like pea or oat straw, and the
Mm-hmm.
cost is very low. And then they bring that in and then they supplement, which is cheaper than buying more pasture for them. So
Sure.
just knowing your cost can give you a lot more
Right.
flexibility in where you can run your cows. And there's no right or wrong scenario, even if you're dry lotting them, but it's cheaper for
Yeah.
you. If that works for you, that's great.
Yeah. How do you track? I guess like one of the questions I've always struggled with, and it's just something I haven't figured out good, is like tracking actual production records of like how many animal units per day per acre or whatever do I harvest and stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so if you've got in my area $250 an acre land rent, to figure out my cost
Mm-hmm.
per day on that pasture, I have to figure out how many days of grazing I can get off of it. And I've
Mm-hmm.
never had a good way to figure out. I mean, at the beginning, we got a 100-pound calf on a cow. And at the end of the fall, you got a 400, 500, 600-pound calf on a cow. And
Mm-hmm.
you're shuffling cows around between farms. And some of it I make hay on in the first cut and then move it into pasture on the second and third rotation. Like, I really struggle with figuring out exactly how many animal unit days I have on a given pasture so I can adequately account my cost per acre. Or, if that makes sense. How do you do it?
Yeah, and I'm not doing anything special. So how I'm trying to just figure it out is, okay, what is my on that ground? Say if it's rented ground, because
Mhm.
that makes it the easiest. Is if you have rented ground, what does it cost you to rent that ground for the year? In South Dakota and where we're at, it's very typical that you get to rent it for the whole year. I know some
Okay.
places it's monthly, like you can be on it for 8 months and then you have to be off. For us, we get that whole year of lease. So it's like I'm tracking. I just put it in my four wheeler. It's nothing special. I just put it in a notebook and I write, we were on this ground for this many days. And I'll just guesstimate, how much is this calf weigh? We were there. You track the animal days per acre. And then I evaluate the cost with that of if I'm renting that ground for X amount of dollars, and then you divide that by the day, and then you figure out, well, this is how much, then you can figure out how much does it cost to run this animal per day. And then I'll just put all that stuff I have in a notebook once a month
Mm-hmm.
into a spreadsheet and then say, hey, for the month of June, we were on these pastures or whatever, and this is what it costs per day. It's not
Sure.
perfect, but at least it gives me an opportunity to say
Right.
I'm getting close, and I'm saying, wow, we're probably spending more on even on less productive ground. There's been times where I've figured out on less productive ground, we're spending way too much time there because it's costing us more per acre based on the productivity of the ground. I mean, we have some pastures where, it's not uncommon to get 4,000 pounds of dry matter per acre per year on that. And then
Mm-hmm.
we also have some more gravel ground where the cost is higher, but we're only harvesting, or I mean, its potential is only 2,800 pounds per acre. So it's like, Why are we focusing on, if that's a lease, that should we focus on keeping it? A lot of the time, yes, because pasture's so limited. But there's
Hmm.
been times too where we've just moved on from a piece of ground because it's not important to us and it's not producing, and we'll
Yeah.
help that ground out. I mean, we'll, not in a synthetic sense, but we'll fertilize it. I mean, we treat rented ground much like owned ground, because if we want to have a long term relationship with those people,
Right.
we want to show them that we're good stewards of that land. So I would
Hmm.
say, it pains people if you're not good at data or you don't like doing it, to just keep a notebook with you and say, this is
Yeah.
how long we were on this ground, and this is how much it cost me per year,
Hmm.
and this is how many animals were there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's something I just need to do better at. Yeah, one of the
Hmm.
many, many things that need to do better at. No, that makes sense. Well, we're already at over an hour here. I do want to talk a bit about your decision to get into direct marketing. We won't go in as deep as it probably could, because I want to get into my wrap
Sure.
up questions and stuff too. But talk a little bit about your decision to get into that. What are you doing? Why did you do it? And how's it going?
Yeah. So our choice to get in direct marketing was centered around the commodity prices during COVID. It was one of our biggest factors. We had people who would ask us from time to time, mainly family, some friends, like, "Hey,
Hmm.
do you guys ever raise beef? We see a lot of your cattle. They look healthy. They look great. Do you ever raise beef?" At that time, we were only raising beef for ourselves and maybe a few family members. And then I started having some conversations with some producers who were finishing cattle direct market, and just looking at the economics of it, looked really good during COVID, looked really profitable. And it was some during COVID, it was one of those things where, I think it was the year after COVID, cattle prices obviously were still pretty low, and we were making anywhere from $800 to $1,000 more per head on that direct to market animal versus what they were in the commodity sector. So obviously that was really attractive. That number
Yeah.
has shrunk a lot, obviously, with cattle prices being really good now.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's an industry that we want to continue to be in, because it's grown from 3 to 4 animals a year, and now we're sometimes pushing 40 depending on the
It's
year. 40
awesome.
is kind of the number that
Yeah.
I set, simply because that's all I can deal with. It's a lot of communication between people. It's a
Yeah.
lot of education that I spend a lot of my time, especially with new customers, explaining them how the process works, the questions they should be asking the butcher, cut sheet, all that stuff. And
Right.
we don't do any retail sales. It's all custom exempt. So we're selling quarters,
Sure.
halves, wholes,
Yeah.
and
That's
that seems to
phenomenal.
work well. Yeah, and it seems to work well for us, because I book, so 12 months of the year I make 4 to 5 appointments at the same butcher every month, the last Monday of every month, and then
Sure.
I know, okay, I'm taking them in. We typically now are 4 to 6 months out on booking, and 75% of our customers are repeat, so it makes it easy. I always try and add a
Yeah.
few more for the new customers or whatnot. So
Hmm.
yeah, whether you're grain finished, grass finished, what I always tell people is, with direct market beef, people come to you because they want a relationship with their local farmer and rancher, or they want to know where their food's coming from.
Right.
We don't have a lot of people who come out and look. For example, we have a website, and they'll call and ask questions. We've had the few off people who do come out and look, and I'm fine with that, as long as it works for everybody's schedule. But that was the main turning point, was just, how can we make our cow calf operation more profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it started out of. But now it's grown into something where it's one of my favorite parts of our business. Not so much the tracking and the phone conversations. That's all good, and that does get a little tiresome, because some people have no exposure to it at all. Our
Yeah.
biggest market is Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is the largest population base in South Dakota, and then Brookings, South Dakota. There's quite a bit as well. So we use a butcher out of Pipestone, Minnesota, D&T's Meat Market. I'll give them a shout out. They're great. We love
Sure.
them. They're a
Good.
family owned butcher shop.
Yeah.
They've been in the same family for almost 40 years. It was the grandfather who was an immigrant, and then it was his son, and now it's the son in law. I mean,
Cool.
we're able to work with them as far as, we'll tell them exactly what we want. They'll do things. They'll check the cooler daily to make sure our carcasses are where we want them, and they're always open to feedback, and it's a good working relationship. And I've had other lockers, but just owners of lockers that I've met, and they've asked, it's hard for me to move my business when you have such a good relationship
Right.
with them.
Yeah.
And yeah, and we're doing something that's different. You know, there's some direct market producers in our area. We're doing a 100% grass finished base. We're not a part of the American Grass Fed Association, but we follow their standards, you know, and sometimes maybe even go beyond that. So in the summer, and as they're grazing as long as they want, spring, summer, fall, and then once they're off of the grazing aspect, we are putting them on a high quality, depending on the year, but lately it's been a really high quality alfalfa grass baleage, and that seems to do really well. We get everything feed tested. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then I use a program. It's out of Canada. It's really cheap if anybody ever wants to use it. But I get all my feed tested and I can plug it all into that program and I can kind of balance a diet, like, because I'm shooting
Right.
for 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds. That's about the best you're going to get per day on a animal that's consuming only a forage base with no starch.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. No, I really like how you're doing it. If I could go back, we had a direct marketing business and did all kind of retail cuts and stuff too. And you're doing it exactly how I would want to do it, not having to deal with inventory of meat and managing all that stuff. It's you drop off the animal, it's out of your hands from there for the most part. That's
Right.
wonderful. As far as, you know, just ability to manage, it becomes a whole nother level when you start dealing with product retail and stuff. But love that, and the future of
Yep.
what it means for your farm, hopefully, and stuff. That's all great as well. Really cool.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there too about, you know, retail looks appealing because you can sell more individual cuts and your
Yeah.
ability for profit is probably a little bit higher. But like I'm trying to always balance it with what's best with our family. That even goes back to the conversation of making hay. Do I want to spend all summer making hay,
Yeah.
you know, or do I want to spend more time having time with my family? You know,
Right.
that may be a weird thing to say for some people, but there's an opportunity cost to everything, and there's
Mhm.
an opportunity and there's time you never get back. So I even look at that because I toyed around with the idea of moving to a different butcher last year that was USDA certified, and so we could do retail. But I ultimately scrapped it because I felt like, well, I'm going to have people coming over now asking for 5 pounds of beef, and then that takes away a half hour
Yeah.
from my family or whatever, you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
So always opportunity cost.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's funny how that those 5 pounds of ground beef become pretty expensive when you spend a half an hour selling it, kind of a thing and
Hmm.
stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Good. All right. We're going to dive into today's What Are Your Thoughts question, sponsored by Ambrook. Ambrook is the accounting software I use for all of my businesses. If you're interested in learning more, check out Ambrook. Well, if it's all right with you, we'll move on to the kind of what are your thoughts questions that I've got here. I'd
Yeah.
be curious to get your perspective on them. The first one then is, what are your thoughts on debt and leverage?
This is something I think about a lot, and I think about it from the old school thought of Dave Ramsey. Because I mean, I've done Dave Ramsey. I mean, I know personally we still implement a lot of that stuff. But the more and more I get into it, and the more and more I listen to people like a John Haskell or, you know, Wally Olson when they're talking about things like that, it's like I always got read. This is not gospel. This is not right or wrong. But this is how I look at it. It's like, what is your asset base? Kind of like a typical bank balance sheet. What is your asset base? What is your debt rate, or what is your debt base? What do you feel comfortable with? Because there's a lot of people who are comfortable with a lot of debt, and then there's a lot of people who aren't comfortable with any debt. So it's obviously highly individualized. But here's how I look at it. Okay, if something happened to my wife and my kids, if something happened to me, what would it look like for my wife and kids? What would I be leaving? Would I be strapping them with debt for the rest of their lives that our assets wouldn't be able to take care of? That's not something that I want to do. So I always look at it as I'm only comfortable with the amount of debt that I can handle, that I have the asset base to service. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's if I have the asset base to service it, and I talk with my banker often. I say, you know, I want to buy, say, a friend of mine, perfect example. He had a family scenario come up, needed to get rid of 20 cows. He grazes way harder than I do, and I'm like, I'm not a red Angus guy, but I'll buy some red Angus because
Good.
they're good cows that do really well, and that was an
Yeah.
opportunity that I had just this summer, and he needed to offload them. And
Yeah.
I go to my banker, we look at it, and it's like they were priced right, $3,500. They were, you know, 6-year-old cows, and he needed the money,
Nice.
and
Yeah.
you know, so it's like, and
Great.
I have the asset to service that if something happens, and they hold their own value. I
Right.
bought them back in April. They've all calved already in May, so they were in my calving season. I think there's an opportunity to use debt wisely that so many people miss the boat on because they're, maybe they have the Dave Ramsey mentality, or they have the asset, or the thought train of, well, is it really an asset? And it's like, you got to know the risk involved. There's risk involved with everything, obviously, but
Right.
if you look at that scenario, okay, number of cows, $3,500 in today's market that are going to calve within month. They were confirmed bred 3 months ago. I mean, that's a pretty low risk to that all. Sure, you could lose a calf, but at the
Yeah.
same time, your odds of capitalizing on selling that calf. Because I look at it with the cow market right now, it's like, okay, if I'm going to go buy pairs, for example, which I've just recently bought some pairs from another guy that was having some financial trouble or whatnot, and
Mhm.
they're coming out of Kansas, and it's like, okay, what does that number look like? So talking to my banker, it's like, well, what's a calf worth? Say 2,500. What's the cow? What is a dry cow worth? Right? 20.
Right. 2
Shoot,
grand or so.
there's been
Yeah.
some dry cows going for a lot more than 2,500. So I figure if
Sure.
I got 2,500 in that calf to get, if he makes it to weaning, and that's what I can sell him for, and then her dry price is below what the cold cow market is now. There's some cold cows recently in our area going for $1.90 or higher. So it's like you're at over $3,000 on some of those. So
Yeah.
it's like smart debt is great to me. And I know
Yeah.
Haskell talks a lot about that. And
Right.
I don't mind the debt. I used to be really afraid of debt when I
Mhm.
first got started, but it's weird to say, but once you have proven yourself not necessarily right, but have taken those leaps and get more comfortable with it, and you really knowing the numbers behind it, I
Right.
think it's a smart way to grow. Because sure, I could have stayed at my whole life, stayed at 40 cows, never worried about, having to buy any more cows. But with expansion comes cost. And there's a real big thing. It's really hard in agriculture with the way, your pay cycles are. A lot of people get paid once a year,
Right.
or when they sell their calf crop. It's really
Yeah.
hard to have all that cash on hand all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do think you're right that and I've experienced it the same with, when I bought my first rental property for $155,000, I remember I didn't sleep for a
Hmm.
long time, the kind of stress of
Right.
that kind of just debt number. But when you start figuring out how this works and the cash flows and it makes sense, all of a sudden it gets a lot
Hmm.
more comfortable. So yeah, I agree with you. Just yeah, yeah. If it can cash flow and you can, smart debt isn't the worst of things. Good. Next is what are your thoughts on land ownership?
From just a general perspective, or just
Yeah, yeah. Is it worth doing? Is it too expensive? Is it something people should do early, late in life? What are your thoughts? And what are your thoughts around land ownership?
Yeah, yeah, another intriguing thought, because I think of this often. Our land base that we run on is about half owned and half rented, and obviously, I come at it from a row cropping perspective because that's what we hear talked about a lot. But I'll offer both. On the row cropping perspective, owning land is obviously always going to be the key, because your cost is, your cost on a row cropping operation, and what you get when you harvest that crop is a lot easier to stomach. Maybe sorry, let me back up. Maybe if you bought that land at a fair price, obviously land ownership, the way it looks, and especially within the last 20 years, land's going to always appreciate. So you have this investment nest where, yeah,
Right.
maybe great grain prices aren't great right now, but grain prices are something that, obviously fluctuate heavily. There's crop insurance tied to it. There is risk, but it's a lot lower risk than, say, some other things, when because you always have the safety net of the products that you're buying, whether that's crop insurance, hail insurance, or depending on what you spend. So I love land ownership when it comes to row cropping, and I love land ownership when it comes to pasture too. The biggest problem is most young producers have been priced out of land ownership.
Hmm.
For me, especially, I don't own any land personally. Our farm and ranch owns land, and someday I'm sure I'll be a part of that. Whatever that looks like, if that's buying from my dad or inheriting or whatever.
Right.
But it's so the barrier to entry has become so impossible for people who aren't already in agriculture. That's the most discouraging thing around land ownership for me. I shared the story earlier when we were talking about my dad starting farming when he was 18 years old and being able to build a life and career out of it.
Right.
That's something that is maybe possible now, but it's not the norm by any means. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just a with the equipment cost, with
It's challenging.
the
Yeah.
land cost, it's very, very challenging. So
Yeah.
yeah, in a perfect world, owning land is obviously the key because you have an
Right.
appreciating asset. Will we see a time in our life where land ownership goes down? Maybe, but I actually find that very hard to believe simply for the sake of outside investors. You see in our area in eastern South Dakota, a lot of people who don't even have anything to do with agriculture buying land as a tax haven or buying it as a tax shelter where they're not really treating it as a production product. They're fully removed for the land, so they're not caring for the land. They're just looking at it as an example is we have a very large company here in Brookings, South Dakota. This gentleman is the CEO of the company, and he owns more farmland than most actual farmers do. And that's the biggest problem I see because he hires the same guy to farm all the farmland. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so now you're taking opportunity away from other farmers because
Yeah.
nobody else is getting a chance. And I'm not saying life's supposed to be fair, but if, with the outside investment standpoint, a lot of those people economically are more well off than a farmer or rancher because of the industry that they're in. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So that
Absolutely.
makes it challenging in eastern South Dakota. We've had a lot of that come up around us, and it drives land prices up, which makes it even harder for the younger farmer and rancher. I'm 39 years old, and when I got started in it, land ownership was something that I was really interested in, and I'm still interested, but for me, I've been trying to focus more on what can I control. So it's like, how can I build relationships with people? We have a mass exodus in our community, much like the agriculture community, where there's a lot of people who are getting to the age where they're renting their land out, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so it's like, how can I make good relationships with people like that, where we can have the same goal? I'm working with a landowner now. They have a bee business, and his main goal is keeping a healthy habitat for the bees. He loves rotational grazing. He loves taking care of the land, water quality, all of that stuff. So those are the people that I'm trying to work with, simply because I can't afford the amount of pasture that he has, but him and I can have a good relationship together and
Right.
try and accomplish some things together. So, and I'm sure, I've heard a lot of your same guest experiences, concern the same problems, but we have a we have a farming and agriculture problem where a lot of people aren't coming back to the farm anymore because
Yeah.
other
Right.
other financial is more attractive. We seemingly, I was listening to the governor, or the Republican governor candidate in Iowa, talk about that. Iowa has a mass exodus of young farmers and ranchers and just young
Yeah.
professionals, where 25% of their population base is leaving once they're done with college. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I think those are the things I spend a lot of time thinking about. It's like, yeah, land ownership is good, but how can we build better relationships with the people around us? Because the reality of farming and ranching is it's an old profession. People are old. I mean,
Mm.
the average age of the farmer, the last time I looked, the farmer and rancher was, I think it was in the early 60s. So it's like
Yeah.
there's going to be a huge transition happening in the next 20 years. And as a young producer, how can you get yourself in the door, and how can you position yourself to be able to facilitate those kind of conversations when they're not always easy conversations approaching someone? I've taken the approach many different ways of just saying, hey, I noticed that your land's coming up for rent. I'm a young producer. I can give you examples of how I'm stewarding our land and all the benefits that's come about it.
Mm-hmm.
And in that conversation, two different ways has ended. Obviously, well, where we've garnered a relationship, but then there's that other person who just wants the maximum amount of dollar for their
Right.
return. So
Right.
and I just have to realize that that's probably not my target producer that I'm want to work with anyway. So,
Yeah.
and those are some of the hard realities around the financial aspect of owning land right now.
Right. No, fantastic. Good thoughts. The The third question then is, what are your thoughts on off-ranch investing?
Off-ranch investing is wise. It's smart. I'll use an example of a friend. He was the one that kind of first taught me about it, and that's something I've been thinking about lately and trying to get some plans together to do more of it. I have a friend. They farm 5,000 acres in Brookings County. They
Wow.
used to own, I think, 90% of that land base, and
Wow.
and they sold it all. They sold
Really?
every acre, and they rented it all back.
Wow.
They used the money that they got from selling all of that land and invested it into real estate and other adventures that I'm not exactly sure, but I know they're not all around real estate. They kind of
Yep.
split it up into three different categories. So
Hmm.
then they're renting all the land back. They're using the rent payments as a tax help essentially, because in agriculture you can write off tax rent, which is
Yeah.
pretty profitable for them because they're making a lot of money in the real estate world. So that's keeping their
Sure.
taxes down from a corporation standpoint. So I think off-ranch investing can look a lot different. That's one example. Another one I
That's
always
wild.
like is,
That's wild.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is
You
wild.
don't
It
hear
was
that too often.
when I heard that, and I'm like, my first thought was, are you crazy? Why would you ever sell all that land?
Right.
Because it's land
Yeah.
that had been in their family for generations,
Right.
and it
Right.
was already paid for. You know what I mean? A lot of it was. I mean, they had bought some, but the majority of it was already paid for. So I thought it
Yeah.
was pretty wild. But then they're big into investments, so I understand what they're trying to do. I
Hmm.
understand that there's two sides to that, but I understand what they're trying to do. The other thing I think about ranch investments is I have a son. I have one son and three girls. I think I heard Gabe Brown talk about this years ago, and it really has made me think. It's like when it comes to farm inheritance, it's not, I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be. Someday, when it's not me and my wife. Yeah, I don't want it. I don't want to split three ways because then
Hmm.
you're making the kids buy it. With agriculture, as hard as it is to start now in it,
Yeah.
it's like, why do I want them to pay for the land twice?
Hmm.
That's insane to me. So
Right.
I've also often thought about, for like, I have one daughter who really likes farming and ranching too. So I'm like, oh well, whoever it ends up being, if it's one or more, I don't, from an investment standpoint, what about that third or fourth child who maybe doesn't like the ranch? But what can I do for them so that they're not feeling like they totally got axed in the end when it came to inheritance and things like that.
Right.
So I've thought about, well, what kind of investment can I get them? Whether that, like you talked about, your property you bought, is
Hmm.
rental property, storage units, real estate, whatever that is. Those are things that I've been thinking about more for my other children, who I don't
Yeah.
want them to get the farm because I don't want their siblings to have to buy it. But what can I do for them where, something that can generate income and cash for me now on a
Hmm.
residual base, monthly, which is really nice. Where we talked about before, where some farmers and ranchers only get a paycheck once a year. And I've noticed with the beef business how nice it is having cash flow every month,
Right.
when you're taking in 4 or 5 beef. So
Yeah.
it's like, I want something that can generate me an investment now and a residual return, but then something that I can hand over later in life to my children as well.
Mm. I like that a lot.
So I love that.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly some of the perspective I've had. And some people will say invest everything into the business and grow the business, and that's fine. That's an option and stuff. And
Hmm.
but no, I like that. I see it as an option too, to if I've got kids that want to come home and stuff too, and we're not big enough to have myself and a couple kids all be part of the farm, but I've got this portfolio of whatever over here generating enough income that I
Hmm.
don't need to take an income from the farm. I can step back and let them, as opposed to expanding the farm to bring in the next generation. I see that kind of as an alternative that allows to bring in the next generation. So I think you're right on with that.
I
Then,
will add this.
yeah.
This was another story that I wanted to just quickly add. I
Hmm.
heard it at the South Dakota Grassland Coalition a couple years ago. You made an awesome point about, like, hey, if I have two kids who want to come back and they're really good, but then what does that mean for me? Like, do I have enough humility in myself too, and enough trust to say, I trust you guys to do this. I still want to be a part of the operation, but how can I step back and then let you guys both come in? I think it was Lyle Perman that was talking about when his son Luke came back to the farm
Yeah.
and ranch. He started I think it was an insurance business, or he
Okay.
started selling insurance, and
Sure.
that was a way to generate cash flow for
Right.
himself so that his son could be fully integrated into the business. I think
Right.
that's such a great idea. I think
Yeah.
there's too much pride around farming and ranching sometimes, like, oh, I have to be there for things to go right because I've been there
Hmm.
the longest. Where I think, if we truly care about legacy and family and things of that nature, it's okay to be humbled and have enough humility to say, well, I can go do this for a while so my kids can get established.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I wish I could have gotten to that. I was looking forward to that talk, but yeah, I didn't hear that one. I've had Luke, Lyle's son, on a couple times, and yeah, they're
Yeah,
sharp folks for sure.
they're good people.
Yeah, they are. Good. Well, the last question then is, what are your thoughts on the idea of enough, or what is enough?
Oh, that's a great question. Enough. I think about what does enough look like in everybody's everyday life, and
Yeah.
it's hard when you're working. And I'm always pitting myself. I'll start here, and then I'll get to where I want to go. But I'll
Sure.
start here. Like, I work with my dad, who he grew up where manual labor was the king.
Mhm.
You did manual labor because you didn't have a skid steer. You didn't have a lot of these certain things, that make our lives easier today. And enough for him was, working as much as he could and as hard as he could, because I feel like in that generation, it was true. You had a lot of kids, you worked really hard, and the kids helped you accomplish a lot of the goals of, the harder you work, the more you will reap. Essentially, that was always the big talking point. And you hear it a lot today. The harder the work, I just think there's some efficiency lost on that in today's world. I think we can be more efficient with the decisions we make.
Mhm.
Enough can look a lot different. Enough for me is like being okay with, at the end of the day, and having enough balance in life to say enough is enough for today. I can pick that up tomorrow. I don't have to compare myself to my past generations of my grandfather and my father, who, I'll fully admit, they worked way harder than I ever have,
Yeah.
from a physical labor standpoint. But there's also, and Dad and I talk about this a lot too. It's like there's things I bring to the table from, whether it be a technological side, or analytic or data
Mhm.
side, or just good record keeping side, that,
Yeah.
yeah, I maybe didn't shovel as many hog barns out as they did when they were a kid, but I
Yeah.
can add. There's an asset base that I can add from the, whether it be the, like I mentioned, the analytics or the data record keeping. So
Mhm.
for me, enough is just knowing that, for me, my wife doesn't have to work. She's able to stay at home. She
Yeah.
homeschools our kids. We have four
Love
healthy
that.
kids, and we have an ability to kind of set our own schedule. Like, if we all need to be at the farm that day, we can be, or if my
Mhm.
wife needs to focus on the kids that day, that's an option that we have. Or calving's over, we got everything moved to crop residue. If we want to leave for a week,
Mhm.
that, I mean, nobody's stopping us from that. So,
Yeah.
and that's not everybody's reality, but that's our reality. And for me, that's enough. It's like, hey, there's nothing more than that I ever wanted from when my wife and I first got married. The conversations that we have of wanting her home, nurturing our kids, because if we're not teaching our kids, somebody else is going to be. And my
Right.
wife went to college for, elementary education, so why not have her do that? And I'm not saying all homeschool moms have to have that. It just worked out for us, where that's what our
Right.
lifestyle looks like. But that means also making sacrifices. Like, we don't drive the newest vehicles. Our vehicles are paid off, and they're older, and we live in a
Mhm.
probably smaller house than we would love. But making some of those sacrifices to live the life that we want to be able to, that is enough
Yeah.
for us.
Right. Right. I think that's a good point. I like the idea. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Afford Anything podcast with Paula Pant. She says you can afford anything, but not everything, and so everything's kind of a trade off. And you've chosen certain
Kevin.
lifestyle choices that give up certain other things. And I think that's a great. Yeah, I think that's a good example. Good. Well, then, last two questions. The
Okay.
first is, where can people reach out if they want to
Sure.
learn more about you, or ask you questions or anything? And the second one is, what are 2 or 3 or 4 resource recommendations that you think folks should check out as well?
Yeah. So if you want to reach out and chat or anything like that, I'm always happy to take phone calls, emails, whatever it may be. We have a website. It's www.langlandcc.com, for Langland Cattle Company. And then I'm pretty active on Facebook, Twitter, social media, X or whatever it may be now. Pretty active, and I like to engage with people on there. My favorite resources, I'll kind of list the ones that are around the things that I'm really passionate about the most. Is my favorite resource would be the our local the South Dakota Grassland Coalition or the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition, and I know all your listeners aren't in South Dakota, so I would say two of my favorites that have helped me get connected with producers are what are those local coalitions like in your state? I'm fairly certain every state probably has one, or the biggest impact in my life was made to me by a producer who's just in South Dakota. Nobody knows who he is, doing some of the same things that I like to do. So find a neighbor, or don't be scared to ask people. Like for our grass finished beef, one of the guys we talked to that I had never talked to him, I just seen his videos, was the Alderspring Ranch crew. If you reach out to them, I wanted to learn more about grass finishing beef. So yeah, just don't be scared to reach out to people. Most people in this industry, as you've probably figured out through this podcast, are willing to help you in any shape or form if they have the time and the capacity, and they're willing to share any information possible. One of the other resources that I like is podcasts. I mean, your podcast, but the Ranch Right podcast with the Haskell, and never be scared to learn something off of a podcast or YouTube, because I've found that a lot of my ranching that I had no background into because my dad wasn't exposed to it or he didn't teach it to me, was I learned so much off YouTube, and I think that's pretty common in our society today. Books are great. Any book that has been ever put out from, I'm drawing a blank on his name now, probably because we're on the podcast, but the guy who started the Stockman Grass Farmer, I have
Allan
3 of his
Nation.
books.
I was assuming that was who you might
Allan
be referring
Nation,
to.
Yeah. Allan Nation has some of the best books as far as just teaching you how to spend time in ranching, and what you should be looking for from an economic standpoint. Or even he has in a couple of his books, he touches base on, if you aren't familiar with cattle, he'll kind of walk you through, stockers, or, the cow-calf enterprise. Anything by Allan Nation is really, really good. And I never had the opportunity to talk with him because he had passed on by the time I came back full time. But that was a really, really, those have moved the needle for me the most, as far as just expanding my thinking, going back to our debt conversation as well. He talks a lot about the economics of ranching, and you can learn a lot from that too. And lastly, it's probably a toss up, but I would say if you ever have the opportunity to go to Ranching for Profit. I know I'm talking out of turn here because I've never been to Ranching for Profit, and I need to go. So this is kind of my plug, but I've read so many of their materials online as far as helping you understand your actual costs in your business. Go to one of theirs. And the last time they were in Rapid City, that's the closest one to me. We had another event, but I'm definitely signing up this year. And I haven't been exposed to them for a long time because it just wasn't in my wheelhouse, and I didn't know their true value. But some of the instruction and teachers that they have there, there's a gentleman from Texas, I forget his name, but I've watched some of his videos too. I think it's John Coleman Locke, maybe. Yeah. He's a really good one, and I've enjoyed his content because his family, it's fun to see what his family did from a registered Brahmin operation, and to see how cost wasn't always a big thing for them, to, the profitability side of it, how he's kind of treats it like he treats his registered cows like a commercial cow herd almost. So he has, it's cool that with Ranching for Profit, a lot of the people who lead the sessions are actually farmers and ranchers and have skin in the game. There's nothing more I hate than taking advice from people who don't actually have the skin in the game. Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you for listening to the Ranching Returns podcast. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast, and share it with a friend who you think might benefit from what we talk about here. Also, if you want to learn more about what we've got going on or want to reach out, you can find me at ranchingreturns.com or send me an email at ranchingreturns@gmail.com. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Ranching Returns podcast.